All right, we'll get started now. Thank you for tuning in. This is the final presentation in our online conference, End Inflation and the Fed. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and I hope you've enjoyed this conference. We're biased, but we really consider this one of our best and most important and timeliest conferences that we've ever held, given the inflationary ravages of the Federal Reserve and what it's doing to people's savings and income and the general chaos that it has produced in American society. And I think we all know it's not over yet. Before I get started, please keep in mind that this is our end-of-year fundraising time. You should have gotten an end-of-year fundraising letter from us, either by email or in writing, if you've been on our mailing list for a while and you're one of our supporters. As you know, you all have kept us going for 33 years, and our mission is to present this principled, uncompromising case for the libertarian philosophy. We try to raise people's vision to a higher level. Instead of just reforming this welfare warfare state serfdom under which we live, we want freedom. And that means making the case for genuine freedom, which is, of course, identifying and dismantling the infringements on freedom. So I hope you'll keep this in mind. You can go to our website at fff.org and click on the donate button, or you can just send us a check. All right, let's get started. One of the big famous sayings that came out of the Revolutionary War in 1776 was not worth a continental. And what people meant by that was that the Continental Congress had printed so much paper money that was called a continental that by the end of this printing press spree, the continental wasn't worth anything. Here's an example of a Continental bank note, 1775, $20 note. Here's a Continental bank note, 1776, for 1/3 of a dollar. And by the time they had flooded the market with these things, at the end of it, the Continental wasn't worth anything. It wouldn't buy anything. It was worthless. And that was so that people had this saying that when anything was just worthless, they didn't want to pay for it. They said, not worth a continental. So when the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia to ostensibly come up with reforms to the Articles of Confederation, they instead decided in secret to come up with a new proposal, a different type of governmental system. The Articles of Confederation were essentially little nation states that had come together in a confederation. And the federal government under the Articles of Confederation was very, very weak. I mean, it was vested with very few powers. In fact, get this, the federal government was not even given the power to tax. So it existed for 10 years or so without being able to tax people. And that's the way people wanted it, because our American ancestors, they didn't consider that Russia was their big threat to their freedoms, or that China was, or any other foreign regime, including Britain. They considered the biggest threat to their well-being and their freedom was their very own government. So they loved the fact that this government had very few powers. Well, along comes the Constitutional Convention and proposes what can be called a limited government republic. And people were very leery, because now this government had more powers, including the power to tax. Now the taxes were indirect, but nonetheless, it was a power to tax. So people were very leery, but they were finally sold on the idea because the proponents of the Constitution said, look, this is a government whose powers are going to be limited. And the powers are going to be limited to those enumerated in this document that calls the federal government into existence. If it's not enumerated, they can't exercise it. The American people bought into that argument, but on the condition that a Bill of Rights, which should have been called a Bill of Prohibitions, was enacted to ensure that government could not take away, the federal government could not take away people's fundamental rights. And if they did go after somebody, they have to go through these barbed wire entanglements of civil liberties, which are reflected in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments. So the idea was that the federal government's powers would be limited to those enumerated. People had never done this before in history. The whole world marveled at this. I mean, the idea that people are telling their government, what it can do and what it cannot do. Ordinarily, it's government telling people what they can do and what they cannot do. Now, the states were a different ball of wax here. The states were vested with full powers to do whatever they wanted. It was the inherent governmental powers, what are called the police powers: health, safety, morals, and welfare. Subject to the state constitutions, of course, but as far as the federal constitution was concerned, the states were empowered to do whatever they wanted unless there was a restriction in the Constitution on the state. So two different concepts here. So if we look at the constitutional provisions on money, we can examine what it is the framers were trying to do with respect to the grant of powers to the federal government. So we look in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, the Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin. Now, that's the monetary power there. Now, notice the operative words: to coin money. Okay. Now, you can't coin money out of paper, right? You can only coin money out of metals, and specifically precious metals, i.e., gold coins and silver coins. This is the monetary system they wanted. They didn't want paper money. There is, you can search the Constitution till you're blue in the face, and you will not find a grant of power to make paper money. The power was to coin money, and that was it. Now, the Constitution also provided that the Congress shall have the power to borrow money on the credit of the United States. So the federal government was empowered to issue bills and notes and bonds in terms of borrowing money, but everybody understood that these notes, bills, and bonds were loans, and that they were promising to pay back money, which were the gold and silver coins. It wasn't that the paper was the money; the paper was the promise to repay money. So when you hear today in the mainstream press that the Americans lived under a system where paper money was backed by gold, or they'll speculate, should we have a system again where the paper money is backed by gold? It's nonsense. There never was a system here in the United States where paper money was backed by gold. There was no paper money. The money was the gold coins and the silver coins, and the notes were promises to pay gold coins and silver coins. Now, for convenience sake, people would carry bills in their billfold or whatever and use that, but everybody understood that it was always a promise to pay money, and that you could take a $5 bill, a paper bill, and go into a bank and get your 5 1-ounce gold coins. So those are the two provisions on money. Now, here's the Article 1, Section 10 on the states. So this makes it very clear as to what kind of monetary system the framers of the Constitution intended for this country. No state shall coin money. Okay, they didn't want the states to do that. The monopoly was going to be with the U.S. trade, the U.S. Mint, the U.S. government, and no state shall emit bills of credit. There you have it, flat out. What is bill of credit? That's paper money. That's what they were saying, that the states cannot issue paper money. They could issue loans again, notes, bonds, or whatever, but always with the understanding that these were promises to pay money. Now, notice also that there is no affirmative grant of the federal government to emit bills of credit. So since there's no affirmative grant, that power doesn't exist. And then no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debt. Now, that clause there just stands as an open mockery of the system in which we live, obviously, because there it is in the Constitution. No state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender. And yet we all know that they all exist in standing violation of that particular provision. Now, here's some examples of the gold coins that people had. They would carry these. This is a St. Gaudens $10 gold coin. These were minted by the U.S. Mint. Here's the reverse side of that same thing. Here's a St. Gaudens Double Eagle, a $20 gold coin. Here's a silver dollar, 1804. Silver dollar, 1921. Now, here's a banknote from 1929. Now, notice that, a note. When we talk about notes, we're talking about promissory notes. These notes are promising to pay something. And sure enough, here it is. The Flat Top National Bank of Bluefield, West Virginia will pay to the bearer on demand $10. So what they're saying is that you can take this note in because it's an instrument of indebtedness. You can walk into the Flat Top National Bank and you can get a Gold Eagle coin, a $10 coin, because again, this is a note that's payable on demand. There's not a maturity date to it. You just walk in there and you can demand your gold. And this is what they would demand, a $10 gold coin when they'd walk into the bank. Here's a $50 bank note, same thing, First National Bank of such and such, Ottumwa, Iowa, promise to pay on bearer on demand $50. They're talking about a double eagle, 2 double eagles, 20 and 20, plus a regular eagle, there's $50. I wanted to stick this in as a $500 bill. We used to have $500 bills, but they were going to win the war on drugs by preventing drug dealers from easily stacking their money. And so they got rid of $500 bills, and that really won the war on drugs. And now here are silver certificates. Now these were very interesting that they were issued between 1878 and 1964. A silver certificate meant that you could take your, let's say, 5 silver dollars. If you didn't want to keep them at home, or you had a lot of silver dollars, you could take them over to the treasury and deposit them there with them. It was sort of like a depository a relationship, and they would give you a silver certificate so that whenever you wanted to, you could just go in there and claim your silver coins and walk out with them. Here's a silver certificate from 1896, again for 5 silver dollars. Here's a silver certificate from 1953. United States of America, $5 in silver payable to the bearer on demand. Now, I talked about what happened with the Continental, and we'll get into that concept as we go along, where ever since Gutenberg invented the printing press, I mean, they've gone wild printing money. I mean, this is the means of plunder and looting people. But I should point out that even before the printing press, it was possible to inflate the currency or debase the currency, to plunder and loot people that way. And what they would do back before the printing press, the king would have, let's say, a 1 ounce gold coin, and he didn't have any more gold to mint coins. And so people would pay their taxes, and they would take the edge of the gold coin and they would shave the edges around. And then with those shavings, they would put all the shavings together and melt them down to make a new coin. So now he's got 2 gold coins instead of 1. And nobody, would notice, or presumably nobody would notice, that 1 ounce gold coin was now 9/10 of an ounce. Like nobody was supposed to care because, what's an ounce? So this is the way that the king did it. Now, sometimes the shavings were not enough because, kings have a lot of expenses. They got to take care of the people. They got foreign wars. They got militaries. So sometimes they wouldn't worry about the shavings, and they just would cut out a hole in the middle of the coin. And they would take that chunk out of the middle and put them all together and melt them down and make new coins out of it. And of course, the old coin would just be circulating without a center, a little bit less gold in it. So this was our monetary system. Actually, it lasts for about 125 years, where gold coins and silver coins are the official money of the American people. Very, very unique system. And things roll along until a big event in the mid-1800s, specifically 1861. We've got Lincoln initiating his war against the South. And as inevitably happens, sometimes rulers that are waging war are running out of money. And of course, Lincoln was raising money with taxes, but you get to a ruler gets to a point where if he raises taxes too much, people don't like that, and they rebel against higher taxes. So what does the ruler do at that point? Well, he resorts to the printing press, starts printing money, instruments of indebtedness, to finance his war. Now, the risk he runs, of course, is that if he prints too much, people might get a sense of what's happening. And so it's sort of like musical chairs. If they're printing a lot, people start going and getting their gold. They walk into the bank, say, I want my $50 worth of gold on this $50 bill. And then the stampede starts, and the last ones that are ending with the notes end up with nothing. That's the musical chairs aspect of it, because the government's run out of gold. And so that's the risk, is that they publish too much paper. And then, of course, once the government defaults, that's pretty much it for borrowing any more money. So what was happening was Lincoln's notes were starting to trade at a discount. Now, what does that mean? That means that people were getting a sense that there was too many notes out there. Not enough to start a stampede, but enough to where people were leery about accepting the notes at face value. For example, if you walked into a dry goods store and you said, okay, how much is that cattle feed? And the guy says $50. And so he says, okay, and he gives him greenbacks worth 50. The proprietor says, no, I need gold coins, $50 in gold coins. And the guy says, well, no, this is $50 in greenbacks. No, your greenbacks are trading in the marketplace at less than that. And so if you're going to use the greenbacks, you gotta give me $60 in greenbacks, or you pay the whole thing in gold. Well, Lincoln gets wind of this, and no ruler likes to have his integrity challenged in this way. I mean, this is his money, you see. The proprietor's just insulting the ruler. So Lincoln gets enacted the legal tender laws. Now, what are legal tender laws? Well, they're a law that says that everybody, every creditor or person in business has to accept these greenbacks at face value. He can't demand the gold. He has to accept them, even if they're traded at a discount in the marketplace. You got to accept them at face value. And so, it was the first time this had ever happened in American history, the enactment of this type of law. So, a Mr. Griswold, I think his name was Henry Griswold, he had loaned a Mrs. Hepburn a sum of money. I think it was around $11,000. And then the legal tender law comes into existence. So then the note comes due. So Mrs. Hepburn goes over to Mr. Greenwald and says, here is your $11,000 plus interest, whatever she owed him, in greenbacks. And Griswold says, oh, no, lady, I want gold coin. The contract, the promissory note is to pay me in gold coins. And that's the money. And she says, well, yes, but President Lincoln says that I can pay with these greenbacks. I mean, she knew what she was doing. She was trying to cheat this guy out of some money here. And I presume she knew what she was doing. And so there was a conflict here. So Griswold ends up suing Hepburn on this promissory note, and the case reaches the U.S. Supreme Court. And in a split decision, the court holds that the legal tender law is unconstitutional. They say, look, we look at the Constitution to determine whether the government has a certain power or not. And the government doesn't have this power. There's no power to enact a legal tender law. And so Griswold wins. She has to pay him off in gold coins. That's what the contract said. And there's also, no power to impair contracts. This was a private contract. And there's a restriction against the states impairing contract, but there's no affirmative grant of power on the federal government to impair a contract. So Griswold wins. However, within a year or so, there's a change in the makeup in the court. One guy retires and he's replaced, and then there was a vacancy, and so they replace the guy. They fill that vacancy with somebody else, and lo and behold, the court accepts another appeal of a legal tender case, and this time around, due solely to the make a shift in the court, they declare that legal tender laws to be constitutional, and their thinking is a little bit warped and perverted and stretched to get to that point. That said, oh, well, the war powers enable the government to do this. This would fall into the war powers and the general monetary powers, and clearly the court in Hepburn versus Griswold had the better of the argument. But in any event, after the Civil War, things turned pretty much normal again. You've got gold coins back in circulation, silver dollars. This gave this period of sound money, because the mint was producing remarkable coins. I mean, you notice that coin that had the hole in the middle of it. There was never any of that type of thing taking place with U.S. coins. They were always 100% impeccable, 100% honest. Nobody ever suggested there was any fraud. It was truly a remarkable period in American history with respect to the coinage that the U.S. Mint was putting out. Totally honest coinage. And this sound money was one of the major contributing factors to the tremendous increase in the standard of living of the American people from, say, 1870 to around 1915 or so. Real wages of workers, not inflationary wages, because there was none of this printing of money. This was gold coins and silver coins. You can't print gold coins and silver coins. Real wages for workers in that period of time doubled, and then they doubled again. But keep in mind that there was no income tax either. People were keeping everything they earned. They were investing it back into capital, making workers more productive. There was open immigration, so there was tremendous division of labor with immigrants flooding into American shores. There was no drug laws, no Social Security, no Medicare, no welfare, no Pentagon, no CIA, no massive military. So government expenditures were very minor. So inventions were coming in, standard of living was soaring. But this, in the late 1800s, you start seeing the percolation, the activism of socialism. Marx had written his book, Das Kapital, in the latter part of the 1800s or mid 1800s, and it was popular in Europe. There was Americans going to Germany to study. They were coming back all excited about Marxian concepts, and they didn't call it socialism as such. Well, some people did, but tremendous intellectual debates, arguments, fights start taking place in the late 1800s. And the movement was called the Progressive Movement, where they were bringing these socialist concepts and programs and introducing them into the American sphere, and arguing that you need government to protect people from the vicissitudes of capitalism, the sweatshops and so forth. So it was during this period of time that you have big debates in the Supreme Court too. The famous case of Lochner versus New York, where the state of New York puts on a maximum hours law that says, we're going to protect workers from working too many hours. And so they can't work more than 10 hours a day. And you had minimum wage laws that were coming into existence at the state level. Initially, they were declared unconstitutional. So these ideas are percolating, and in 1913, the progressives get two monumental achievements that really reflect the shifting tide in American opinion. Now, at this point, it's just a high tide. It would turn into a tsunami in the 1930s. Here in 1913, they get the 16th Amendment, which enables them to adopt a federal income tax. And they promise that, it'll only be on the rich. Don't worry about it. But we all know how that's turned out. And then they get the Federal Reserve Act. And the whole purpose of the Federal Reserve was to print money. That was the whole idea, because their objective was to create a situation where the government could print money out the gazoo or incur debt out the gazoo, and the Federal Reserve would print the money to pay it off. In other words, what all the other governments in history had been doing. So here's the Internal Revenue Service. I just thought I'd include a picture to make you proud to be an American. And here's the Federal Reserve, so you can be even prouder to be an American, that they've got such a nice building in Washington. Like, you see that eagle up there? Well, what happens is the Federal Reserve starts pumping vast amounts of paper notes, paper money, into the economy in the 1920s. And of course, heard of the Roaring Twenties. And this was a big part of the reason for the Roaring Twenties. It's like the boom cycle that we've all come to recognize when the Federal Reserve is inflating the bubble. House values are soaring, the stock market's soaring, everything's good, everybody's happy. And I forget the name of this actress. She's a famous actress from the 20s. She's doing the Charleston there, a famous dance in the Roaring Twenties. And then the Fed realizes that they've overprinted. Remember, the Federal Reserve is a socialist body in the sense that it involves central planning of money. And the central planners you always had chaos with central planning, but you especially had it now because they didn't have much experience with central planning when it came to money. So they overreact and they start to contract the money. They raise interest rates like the Fed's doing now, but they suck too much money out. They over-contract, causing businesses to just crash. There's not enough money and credit in the economy. So you got the stock market crash in 1929, and they're the guys on Wall Street, and they're the guys that have not yet jumped off the high buildings, because you had millionaires losing everything overnight, and they couldn't stand to live their lives without their millions. They were now impoverished. They were committing suicide because of what the Fed had done. Here, that morphs into the Great Depression. Here's the soup kitchen line, free cup of coffee and donuts for the unemployed, free soup. Now, we've always been taught, especially in our public schools, government-supported colleges and universities, that the Great Depression, the stock market crash, was the failure of the free enterprise system. That's what Roosevelt said, when he came into office in 1933, that it's the failure of free enterprise. It's what every American's taught. Well, it's a logical thought if you think the Federal Reserve is part of a free enterprise system. And people did. They thought, well, America's a free enterprise country. That means the Federal Reserve is part of the free enterprise country. But it isn't. It's exactly opposite to the concept of free enterprise. It's central planning. It came into existence in 1913. And so Milton Friedman, libertarian economist, wins a Nobel Prize in economics. He publishes a book along with Anna Schwartz, A Monetary History of the United States, that shows how it was Federal Reserve manipulation that caused the Roaring '20s and then the stock market crash in 1929. Another great book making the same case, Murray Rothbard, Austrian economist, libertarian, America's Great Depression. But you see, they couldn't admit that at the time. They had to make this case for, the failure of a free enterprise system. They had to lie about it, because imagine if the American people really understood that it was the Fed that had caused the stock market crash. I mean, look at all the suicides and stuff. Lots of pain and suffering. I mean, there could have been maybe even a revolution at that point, because people would have been pretty darn angry. So they had to maintain the lie. And then, as we all know, Roosevelt ushers in the welfare state, the 1930s. This is the gigantic transformation. This is the tsunami that the progressives had been leading toward ever since the late 1800s. And of course, the biggest manifestation of the system was Social Security, which was a socialist program that had originated among socialists in Germany, and American scholars had gone over there, imported it back, and it finally comes into fruition here, supposedly as a temporary measure to help seniors out. I mean, notice that, you hear this concept, though, I put it in, Jacob, I have a right to get it back. And no, nobody puts into anything. You get taxed. And these first Social Security recipients, they hadn't put anything in, because they were the first recipients. And it was a straight welfare state program. It always has been. And it ends up being permanent. It doesn't, when the Great Depression ends, Social Security stays into existence. And so does the entire welfare state. The idea that government exists to take care of people. We get Medicare, we get education grants and FDIC, and on and on and on. Drug war to take care of people there. Now, that wasn't the only part of Roosevelt's program. He had the National Industrial Recovery Act. And you see that NRA, that's not National Rifle Association, that's National Recovery Administration with a blue eagle. We do our part. And if a business wouldn't join the NRA, I mean, they would harass him. I mean, it was a pretty scary time. Every business was supposed to be a member of this thing. And it was really just gigantic cartels. It came straight out of Mussolini's Italy. It was economic fascism in its purest form. In fact, there's a great book I'd recommend about FDR's New Deal. And it's called Three New Deals by Wolfgang Schimmelbusch. Reflection on Roosevelt's America, Mussolini's Italy, and Hitler's Germany, 33 to 39, showing the similarities between the programs here. And in fact, here's a letter that Hitler wrote to U.S. Ambassador Thomas Dodd in 1933, commending President Roosevelt for his program, because he says he was following exactly what the German people were doing. The president's successful struggle against economic distress is followed by the entire German people with interest and admiration. The right chancellor is in accord with the president that the virtues of a sense of duty, readiness for sacrifice, and discipline must be the supreme rule of the whole nation. The public weal before the private gain. So they were on the same wavelength here. And a perfect example of this is FDR's gold confiscation. Now, I call it a confiscation. It's actually a nationalization because they did pay something for people's gold, but it's incredible. I mean, this is pure dictatorship. You'd have a hard time finding a clear example of dictatorship here. Roosevelt in 1933 orders this is after he comes into power, which is the same year Hitler's coming into power. He orders everybody to turn in his gold coins to the Federal Reserve. And this is an executive order. This is I'm commanding you to do this. This is not congressional legislation. And he's saying, and this is the official money of the American people. This is we, the people, established this system under this Constitution that has been here for 125 years plus. And he is saying, I am unilaterally decreeing it to be over, end. And here he establishes criminal penalties for violating his order, a $10,000 fine or 10 years imprisonment or both. And they went after people that they caught holding their gold coins or saving their gold coins, which they called hoarding gold coins. It is one of the most unbelievable, horrific abuses of power in American history. Now, like I say, they paid them for it with Federal Reserve notes. But as soon as they pay them, they had a month to turn in their gold. And they paid them with Federal Reserve notes. But as soon as they did that, then Roosevelt devalues the dollar in relationship to the price of gold. So, in other words, if he had devalued first, people would have gotten more money. But because he devalued after, people got essentially screwed. Now, then that confiscation is ratified in the law after the fact by Roosevelt signing the Gold Reserve Act in 1934. And here he is signing the bill with all his henchmen around him. Let me see. Wait a minute. Let me turn back here. Okay, so by May 10th, the government had taken in $300 million in gold coins and $470 million in gold certificates. And then they nullified gold clauses, which we'll get to in a minute. The government price of gold was increased to $35 an ounce, effectively increasing the gold on the Federal Reserve's balance sheets by 69%. This increase in assets allowed the Federal Reserve to further inflate the money supply. Because you see, now they got a huge quantity of gold. They don't have to worry about Americans having a run on the bank because Americans can't hold gold. They can print to their heart's content, with one exception: that central banks and foreign governments were still able to demand gold, but they weren't worried about that. So one problem that arose for them was that in these loans that have been made by private companies, because private companies issue bonds, they're borrowing money from people, that they had clauses in these bonds that said they will be paid back in gold. And these were incredible bonds because some of them were like 100 years, like a railroad issue, a 100-year bond. Now, who would invest in a 100-year bond today? Nobody, because with it'd be inflated out of existence. But people were buying these 100-year bonds or investing in these bonds because they felt secure, payable in gold. They knew gold maintains its value over long periods of time, even 100 years. So it really provided a nice source of capital for these corporations, and it was a nice way for people to invest their money. Well, so the Federal Reserve Act, the Congress nullifies these gold clauses and says they're no longer valid. Remember, there's no power to impair contracts. And then there was also bonds and notes, bills of course, that had been issued by the federal government promising to pay gold. They nullified those too. So the cases reached the Supreme Court. They're called the Gold Clause cases, 1935. And there were 4 justices that were standing up against the whole New Deal. And these guys are just really heroic. They're called in the history of jurisprudence, they're called the four horsemen. That's what their detractors, their critics call them. It was not a nice term. But these four justices, McReynolds, Van Devanter, Sutherland, and Pierce, were heroic. I mean, they were declaring much of Roosevelt's New Deal unconstitutional. They just said this has no place in American society legally under this type of government we have that's governed by the Constitution. In fact, that Blue Eagle National Recovery Administration got thrown out, declared unconstitutional. And so these four guys, when the Gold Clause cases come to the court, the Supreme Court upholds what happened here, the nullification in private contracts. They say, well, this is a monetary crisis. This is the Great Depression. People are hoarding gold. I mean, hoarding gold. This is their money. It's been America's official money for 125 years, but they're hoarding gold and they're interfering with the recovery. And so they uphold this law. Well, these guys said no, and their dissenting opinion is really worth reading. This is Justice McReynolds. Just men regard repudiation and spoliation of citizens by their sovereign with abhorrence. Now he's pulling no punches here. He's talking about the majority here. But we are asked to affirm that the Constitution has granted power to accomplish both. No definite delegation of such a power exists, and we cannot believe the far-seeing framers who labored with hope of establishing justice and securing the blessings of liberty intended that the expected government should have authority to annihilate its own obligations and destroy the very rights they were endeavoring to protect. Not only is there no permission for such actions, they are inhibited. And then here's a real zinger at the majority. And no plenitude of words can conform them to our charter. That's in Perry versus United States. So you get through the Depression, and now the printing presses are wide open. Then in the 50s, in the 40s, late 40s, you get the national security state. They abandoned the limited government republic. And so the transformation is complete. This is the warfare state side of things. You get the Pentagon, the vast military industrial complex, the whole army of defense contractors, the CIA, the NSA, state sponsors assassinations, coups, invasions, torture. The powers become omnipotent once it becomes a national security state. There are no limits on the power of the national security branch of the government, including assassination and torture of American citizens, indefinite detention. But the spending goes out out the window. I mean, their spending is now soaring. The amount of expenditures, the amount of debt that's being incurred, it's essentially the floodgates are open. The Vietnam War comes. They're expanding Medicare. They're expanding the welfare state. They're expanding the war in Vietnam. They're printing money like crazy. So, but notice that even though they still have notes, they're irredeemable. Notice it says Federal Reserve note. This note is legal tender for all debts. And so it's a promise to pay $1. I mean, just like when the official money was gold. But if you go into a bank and say, I want my dollar, they're not going to give you a silver dollar. They're going to give you another $1 bill. So it's paper money, irredeemable paper money. That becomes the new monetary standard, even though it's clear that the framers did not want this. They expressly made it clear they did not want this. So what you have is this phenomenon where Roosevelt and his Congress have effectively amended the Constitution to change the entire monetary system of the country, and using the Great Depression as the excuse to do that. Well, there is no justification for that in the Constitution. If you want to change the Constitution, you've got to go through the amendment process. And they never did that. They just did it by legislation and executive order, which of course is illegitimate. Here's the $100 Federal Reserve note, again, promising to pay, but promising to pay nothing. You take $100 in there, they'll give you 20 paper bills, $21 bills or whatever, or $5 bills. Here's a website, visualcapitalist.com, that I found that shows what they've done to the purchasing power of the US dollar. Now, if you look over here in 1930, that's when he criminalizes the possession of gold, FDR. And then in 1971, remember I told you the foreign banks could still demand gold President Nixon realized, the, the foreign regimes are now starting to demand gold. And he just said, that's it. We're not going to honor. And so that was when the paper dollar became a totally paper currency. And then you can see the purchasing power of the dollar up here in 1930, it just keeps going down and down and down and down and down. This is what's called the inflation of the money supply. This is the debasement of the money supply. And the only way that purchasing power decrease can be reflected is by higher prices of what money buys. There's no other way it can reflect it. That as the value of your money diminishes, it's buying less. So if gasoline's at $3 a gallon and now it's $6 a gallon, that's saying your dollar has just lost 50% of its value. That's the only way it can be reflected. But what they've done over the decades is a very surreptitious, clever system. Now you've got national debt of $31 trillion. That's how much they borrowed. Now remember, the purpose of the Federal Reserve is to pay off this debt in cheap dollars. But now the Federal Reserve is panicking because they see that gasoline prices, food prices, healthcare prices, everything, cars is soaring. They're raising interest rates, but they're still faced with this debt that is increasing exponentially. Something's going to have to give here. I mean, my hunch is that they are truly trapped at this point, and that the first sign of trouble, you've already seen this Bitcoin firm, FTX, go under. But that raises eyebrows, but not enough to concern anybody like the Fed. But what happens if there's a major banking collapse, like what happened in 2008? Suppose some major banks, more than 2 or 3 major banks where the FDIC is there, are now having trouble. I guarantee you the Fed will quiver and quake and immediately cave in on their interest rate increases. It's just a question of when that type of thing's going to happen. But what they've done, this is what I started to say a minute ago, what they've done is they've changed the term inflation. Everybody understood early on that inflation, like the Continental, was involved the inflation of the money supply, the expansion of the money supply. Well, they changed the term to mean higher prices. So now we have to think in terms of, price inflation. Are you talking about price inflation? And that's the common term. You see, and look at the inflation problem. Look at the inflation problem. Well, that gets you focused over on the rising prices, which then enables them to blame the businessman, to blame the greed, blame big oil, big gas, whip inflation now, you see. And it takes attention away from the root cause of the problem, which is the Federal Reserve. And this is Ludwig von Mises, the Austrian economist. He points out very clearly, to avoid being blamed for the nefarious consequences of inflation, the government and its henchmen resort to a semantic trick. They try to change the meaning of the terms. They call inflation the inevitable consequence of inflation, namely the rise in prices. They are anxious to relegate into oblivion the fact that this rise is produced by an increase in the amount of money and money substitutes. They never mention this increase. They put the responsibility for the rise of living on business. Okay, it's avarice, it's greed. That's what they always say. Now, here's Ayn Rand. She makes it clear too. Inflation is not caused by the actions of private citizens, but by the government, by an artificial expansion or inflation of the money supply required to support deficit spending. No private embezzlers or bank robbers in history have ever plundered people's savings on a scale comparable to the plunder perpetrated by the fiscal policies of statist government. Now, so where do we go from here? Well, the second best alternative is to restore our system, our constitutional system, where gold coins and silver coins are in fact the official money. And that really should be what happened, because they never amended the Constitution to get rid of that system. So their whole system is illegal and illegitimate. And that would certainly go a long way to restoring sound money. But along comes Friedrich Hayek, the libertarian economist, won the Nobel Prize in economics, Austrian economist. He said, let's take it one step further, though. And I endorse what Hayek says. Hayek says, let's get government out of the money business entirely. Let's separate money and the state entirely. Let the free market determine what people are going to choose as their money. Now, I happen to believe that people would orient toward gold coins and silver coins. That's been historically the money people have turned to. But other things could be used. I mean, people have used cigarettes for money. They could use Bitcoin, American Express banknotes, whatever. The free market produces the best of everything. And so Hayek's saying, let's let our heritage of a free market determine that. If the government has a tax, it can determine, what money it should be, what type of money the tax needs to be paid in. But there's no reason why government has to be minting coins or being in the coin business. I think Hayek's right. What's important to keep in mind is that this system here is part of the reason for the chaos that we're experiencing. It all goes together with the welfare state, the warfare state, the out of control spending, the debt, the foreign wars. That you cannot have a free society with all this. And an essential prerequisite, it's not the only prerequisite, obviously, but an essential prerequisite to a free society, a prosperous society, a harmonious society is sound money. And I say that Hayek's right, that should be a separation of money and the state, or at the very least, a restoration of the constitutional system of gold coins and silver coins. On that note, we'll wrap it up and we'll take some Q&A here. All right, let me turn. Oh, that went right. Okay, there I am. All right, here we go. Howard, can you send me a copy of those notes, please? Not sure which notes you want, but if you're talking about money notes, forget it. Okay, if productivity in the gains is 5%, but money and credit increased at 4%, does this still represent inflation? Whether or not one calls it inflation, is it not still doing harm by distorting investment and consumptions? Or to say it another way, does the harm of inflation occur regardless of productivity gains whenever the supply of money has been increased? Okay, if productivity is increasing at 5%, which is what was happening in that period I mentioned in the late 1800s, productivity was soaring because there was so much money going into the investment of capital. It was making people more productive. So you've got a monumental increase here. The hypothetical here is a 5% increase in the standard of living. But if they're inflating currency at 4%, well, that's plundering. That's a tax. I mean, essentially, what the government's doing by lowering the value of your money, making it buy less, is it's taking 4% from you. So you can still have a net gain of 1%, but without the inflation, when you've got sound money, stable money, the increase is the whole 5%. So yeah, you can have it both at the same time, but the inflation, the debasement, which is just a tax, is diminishing the value of the productivity or the increase in productivity. So yes, it's still doing harm. And one of the things that I didn't mention, but has been mentioned in previous discussions, is exactly what he says, that when they inflate the money supply, expand the money supply, it's a very complicated process. I mean, I would say one person in 1,000 understands how the Federal Reserve operates, and they want it that way. They want it really complicated. But it's not like let's say they're going to add $1 trillion. It's not like they divide the money up equally and put it in everybody's bank account. They inject it in at certain areas. And so the people who get it first are the ones who benefit. The ones who get it last are the ones that they're up a creek, because by this time prices have soared, and so they get the crumbs at the end where they can't do anything with it. Their money's lost so much of its value, and it distorts investment. When they artificially lower the interest rate, people think, oh wow, the roaring 20s are back, the boom period is here. I'm going to go out and I'm going to invest in my business. I'm going to buy some new equipment and so forth. Well, it's all fake. And then when the inevitable fakeness comes out, there's the bust. And now that you're having to liquidate and sell off this equipment because the demand really wasn't there at all. So yeah, it does distort investment and consumption decisions. Especially on savings for consumption. I mean, people ordinarily would save their money, but in an inflationary environment, it doesn't pay to save your money. It pays to go out and buy things before the prices keep going up. So it's a totally chaotic system. Does the harm of inflation occur regardless? Yes, it does. All right. Could you please send me a copy of this recording? I would like to use it for the Freedom Library Constitution class. Okay, I guess you're referring to my presentation. Be happy to. We'll be posting this online at our website in the video section, so you'll be able to access it there. I'm not sure about sending a copy of it, but I'll talk to Bart and see what he says. Okay, great summary, no questions. All right. One comment: folks would enjoy a transcript of this speech. Okay, well, maybe I'll do an article that does that. That's an idea. Thank you for your comment. If the government is allowed to determine which currency the taxes are to pay in, would it not give that chosen currency an extreme advantage over other competing currencies? Yeah. I mean, let's say you've got gold coins, silver coins, Bitcoins, and American Express banknotes, and Swiss francs, let's say. And they're all circulating. And the government says, we want you to pay in silver dollars, your taxes. Everybody would then have to buy silver dollars in the marketplace in order to pay their taxes. So yeah, it would give an advantage over silver coins over the other competing currencies. Now, I imagine what they probably would do is just say you can pay in any of these currencies, and they would give the amount in each currency that had to be paid. So they'd give you a choice of, let's say you owe $1,000, you could pay in gold or silver or Bitcoin or whatever under the given exchange rates at that time. All right, government scam with silver confirms your thesis. From 1878 onwards, the U.S. Mint printed silver certificates redeemable for silver coins from the U.S. government. The 1935 silver certificate included this declaration: this certifies that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $1 in silver payable to the bearer on demand, close quote. In 1964, the Treasury Department repudiated that pledge, announcing the certificates were henceforth redeemable only for silver bullion, not coins. In 1967, Congress passed the act to authorize adjustments to the amount of outstanding silver certificates by nullifying all further redemptions. That's right. They just said, we're not honoring silver certificates anymore. Now, I don't know whether they gave everybody warning. I imagine they must have, and said, you better trade them in now. I can't imagine they would be that nasty that one day they just say, we're not going to honor silver certificates anymore. But it's possible, because all they would say is, well, you're not really losing any money because you can come in and get Federal Reserve notes. But I'm not really sure whether that happened or not. I should say that, it remained illegal to own gold coins, except for $100. You could keep $100. And when I said that they enforce these viciously, they really did. I read one account where some foreign company had deposited a vast amount of gold coins. I think it was like $100 million or something like that, with a private company or private bank. And as soon as Roosevelt issues his order, or after the Federal Reserve Act, I'm not sure which one, they tried to withdraw it, and they got caught. And the government, from what I understand, I could be wrong on this, but from what I understand, they seized the whole amount. That was their policy, that if they caught you violating this law, they would seize all of the gold that was in violation. In other words, you didn't get paid even the Federal Reserve dollars. All right. If we went back to the constitutional, I was going to also say they made gold legal again. How nice of them. I mean, can you imagine Americans not being able to own gold? The whole world could own gold for decades. And in 1974, I believe they said, oh, we're going to be so nice to you. We're going to let y'all own gold again. Oh, our little daddy being so nice to us. If we went back to the constitutional stipulation of gold or silver coin, what would be the current valuation of $1? It was $20 per ounce of gold for most of American history. I don't know. That's impossible to say. I mean, right now, gold is going for $1,800 an ounce. You take how much gold is in Fort Knox, how much is in the reserves, and you see how much paper is out there, and you divide, and you come up with the best value you can for it. But ultimately the gold coin becomes the money again. You see, somebody asked a question in another presentation, what if China and Russia go in the gold standard? And of course, they phrase it, the mainstream press says, oh, what if they have a system of paper money backed by gold? That's not the way it works again. If they make gold coins and silver coins their medium of exchange, what happens over here? Well, how many people are going to want irredeemable paper when they've got gold coins circulating now? So my hunch is that the federal governments would be forced to go back to where gold coins are the official money. And where Federal Reserve notes become real notes, promises to pay money again. And then how they would figure out how much money they would pay in terms of redemption, I don't know. They would have to do some figuring out where they've got enough gold reserves to be able to honor whatever instruments that they have outstanding, which are a lot. I mean, they've got dollars all over the world, as you all know. Assume everything you said is correct. Talk about, as a practical matter, to achieve sound constitutional money. How do you envision getting this done? Repeal legal tender laws. That's the first thing. Leave people free to transact in any medium of exchange they want. You could have it competing alongside the paper dollars. That's the first thing. Let people be free to handle their own medium of exchange. And we see what pops up in terms of what people do. But as a practical matter, just start using the federal government declares that the official money is gold coins and silver coins again. They start coining money again. Well, they already are coining money, but that becomes the official money that the government transacts business. And what's out in circulation are promises to pay. And so it says Federal Reserve note. Okay, $1. Okay, well then how do they define $1 in terms of gold? It's just a matter of determining what your assets are in terms of gold versus how much you got out in notes. And you do a division there, and you come up with as best an approximation as you can. Now, I don't know how much gold they have. They say they still have a lot. I'm not convinced of that. My hunch is they've been selling gold over the years, but darn sure it looks like China and Russia have been mounting up. The central banks there have been mounting up like crazy with gold, which is fascinating phenomenon. Here, my hunch is they're dumping here, and over there they're accumulating. But that's how I envision getting it done. Repeal legal tender laws and let the government transact business in gold coins and silver coins. Doesn't a return to sound money require huge sacrifice? If so, any thoughts on how to persuade us to make those sacrifices? I don't think so. The sacrifices are being made by us right now with debased currency. Look what they're doing. They're plundering and looting us with this thing. I mean, look at the purchasing power. And they've done this decade after decade after decade. It boggles the mind as to what our standard of living would be today had those two things in 1913 never happened: the income tax and the Federal Reserve Act, and then Roosevelt's confiscation or nationalization of gold. We got to put a stop to that. That's the sacrifice. We're sacrificing at their altar so that they can run their foreign wars and have their expanding military that's now running almost $1 trillion. Their expanding welfare state. Those are the sacrifices that we need to stop. They're sacrificing us. If we restore sound money, now it's them that have to make the sacrifices. They have to start laying off people in the vast military industrial complex. Maybe they have to restore a limited government republic. Maybe they got to get rid of the welfare state and the drug war. Those are sacrifices that they have to make, which are constructive sacrifices. It was Senator Jesse Helms who helped push through the 1974 law on gold ownership. Okay, that's a nice thing. It was actually led by a guy named Jim Blanchard, who ran a great economic conference, annual conference in New Orleans every year. It is a gold conference, and he led the movement to do this. And this commenter is saying that Helms carried it through the Senate. Murray Sabrin showed timing of economic crisis about 100 years or so. I've heard current system will collapse about 2028. How do you see this ending? I don't buy the cycle theory of economic crises. I think there's cause and effect. There's a reason why there's an economic crisis. That when the Fed inflates, there's going to be a crisis somewhere along the line. We've seen this time and time again. And if it happens every 100 years or whatever, that to me, that's just sheer coincidence. It's all cause and effect. Where do I see this ending? Not well at all. And I've been saying this for a long time, that this cannot end well. Now, we can never predict when it's going to end, but I can tell you when it does end, it's not going to end well. A nation cannot keep doing this. You got $31 trillion in debt. They're incurring, I don't know what, $1 trillion every year, $2 trillion every year now. They raise interest rates. Guess what happens with that debt? The interest rate on that debt goes up too. How's the government going to pay that? I think the annual interest rate on the debt is now $1 trillion. This is not sustainable. And you've got the debt ceiling coming up again in January or February or March or so. You know darn well they're going to raise it again. They never slash spending after each one of these debt ceilings are coming. I don't know when it's going to happen, but when this thing finally cracks up, I think it's going to be a bad one, because they've been inflating this balloon for a long time now, and you know they've got the FDIC to cover now 250,000. Remember, it used to be 100,000. Isn't that kind of interesting that they want to put everybody at ease? Hey, we're covering 250 now. Well, that's fine if there's 5 or 6 banks that go under. What if there's an industry-wide banking collapse? Then what? Go read what I'm thinking about doing an article on this, about what it's like when there's long lines at banks where people are trying to get their money out, like happened in Argentina and other countries. Fascinating phenomenon where the government says, well, we can't give you everything. Come back in 3 months. We'll let you have $300. Come back in 3 months. And Roosevelt did this when he closed the banks down. All right, here's another one. Isn't it possible that inflation could cause the price of some goods to go up while others go down? Theoretically, yeah, but I think that in actuality, that's not going to happen. I mean, we have to think in terms both of supply and demand of the things that money are buying, but assuming that those stay stable, just for argument's sake, we know they don't stay stable, but let's say that the things that money buys stay stable, the prices stay stable. Inflation is going to cause the price of everything to go up, because the money is going down in value relative to everything the money buys. It's possible that because of laws of supply and demand on a particular thing that money buys, like a car, that could affect things where the price of the car actually goes down, even though the money's being debased because people don't want any cars for some odd reason. So that's theoretically possible. But inflation is debasing all of the money. That is, if people are spending more money to buy inflated price goods, then I would think they would have less money to spend on some discretionary items. I would think that would cause less demand for those discretionary goods. And as a consequence, well, yeah, I mean, if money's going up faster in some certain area because the inflated money got there first, housing, for example, people might have less money to spend over here on a car. No question about that. Assuming everything you said correct, talk about how, as a practical matter, and I know we're going over time a little bit here, to achieve sound constitutional money. Well, I think I already answered that question. In 2011, Ron Paul introduced the Free Competition and Money Bill to get rid of legal tender. It never made it out of committee. So again, how do you see getting this done? Well, we're talking about influencing people's thinking. That when a critical mass of people say enough's enough, it's like anything, any aspect of freedom. Ideas matter. This is why we do what we do here at FFF. It's what all the think tanks do and educational foundations. We're trying to change the climate of public opinion to reach a critical mass where the politician's just a chameleon. As far as I'm concerned, everybody in Congress is just a chameleon. As soon as they see the environment changing color, they will change their tune. And so we get enough people to say, we want sound money in this country. That will be reflected in congressional races, political positions, and so forth. So as a practical matter, how do you see getting this done? People demand sound money, and all of a sudden one politician saying it, instead of just the Ron Paul or the Rand Paul or this person or that person, it's a critical mass of people saying, we want sound money. And that's when it's going to get done. And we got one last comment, and it says, thank you. Let me thank you. Thank you very much for tuning in to these presentations. We're just really pleased with how this thing works. And Again, we can't do these kind of conferences without those of you that help us out in a bigger way. And thank you for supporting us for 33 years. I hope we've earned your support for another year. Most of the money we get at the end of the year, we use for the coming year. It's not enough. We still get donations during the coming year, but anything you can do to help us out, we'd be very appreciative. Thank you so much again. And you guys have a very nice Thanksgiving.